The night had fallen over Ashburn City, casting its usual eerie glow over the skyscrapers and shadowed alleyways. Beneath the surface, the city was ruled not by politicians or police but by vampire gangs, ancient and modern bloodlines clashing for control. For centuries, they had ruled the underworld unchallenged, while humans remained blissfully ignorant of their war in the shadows. In the heart of the city, two rival vampire factions, the Crimson Fangs and the Duskburn Syndicate, were about to meet for a truce negotiation. The Crimson Fangs were old-school traditionalists who adhered to ancient vampire laws and customs. Their leader, Marcus Dragomir, had been alive for nearly 5 centuries and held power with an iron grip. The Duskburn Syndicate, on the other hand, was young and ambitious, led by the enigmatic yet ruthless Lyra Kane, who had little respect for the ancient ways. She represented a new breed of vampire, a more vicious, modern predator who embraced technology and innovation. The meeting was set to take place at an abandoned cathedral that had once been the heart of Ashburn's religious community. Now, it was a ruin hollowed out by time, the stained glass shattered, and the pews reduced to rotting wood. Yet, beneath its decaying facade, the vampires felt at home after all. No place was more fitting for the dead than a forsaken church. Marcus arrived with his loyal lieutenants, their faces pale as moonlight, eyes glowing with a faint crimson hue. Lyra came with her crew, young, vibrant, and exuding a chilling sense of danger. They approached each other under the cracked dome, the air thick with centuries of animosity. Marcus, Lyra sneered, her lips curling into a half-smile. "ICH hasn't made you any less arrogant." "Respect, Lyra," Marcus replied calmly, though his voice carried the weight of warning. "You know why we're here. The city cannot withstand our war. Humans are beginning to notice things they shouldn't." Lyra's eyes glinted with mischief. "Oh, Marcus, don't tell me you still care about those weaklings. They are nothing but food and pawns in our game." "Perhaps," Marcus replied, his eyes narrowing. "But if we do not show restraint, we risk exposure. And the Inquisition still exists. They hunt us. They always have." The word Inquisition sent a ripple of tension through the room, even among Lyra's confident followers. The Inquisition was an ancient order, thought to be long gone, but whispers of their activity had surfaced again. Hunters, armed with knowledge passed down for generations, were coming for them. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the cathedral as the massive doors swung open. Both factions turned toward the noise, expecting an ambush or a trap. But instead, a lone figure stumbled into the room, a vampire none of them recognized, his clothes tattered, his face gaunt and hollow. "They're here," the vampire gasped, collapsing to the floor. "What do you mean?" Lyra demanded, stepping forward. "Who is here?" The vampire's eyes, wild with terror, darted around the room. "The Inquisition. They found us." Before anyone could react, a deafening explosion ripped through the cathedral, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Dust and debris filled the air, and when the smoke cleared, figures emerged from the shadows, figures wearing armor marked with the symbol of the ancient Inquisition. Marcus and Lyra locked eyes, their animosity momentarily forgotten. This wasn't supposed to happen, not here, not tonight. They were supposed to be untouchable in their city, but somehow, the Inquisition had breached their defenses. "Prepare for battle," Marcus shouted, his voice carrying a sense of urgency. But as the vampires prepared to fight, something even more sinister became apparent. The Inquisition wasn't just targeting them. Strange, dark figures appeared in the distance, lurking in the shadows beyond the human hunters, figures that even the vampires couldn't recognize. Lyra's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. "What are those things?" One of her lieutenants, a fierce young vampire named Rafa, pointed toward the figures, his voice trembling. "They're not human, not Inquisition, something else." Marcus narrowed his eyes, trying to make sense of the creatures approaching from the depths of the night. They moved with a natural grace, their skin pale but not like a vampire's, something more ethereal, more ancient. As one of the creatures stepped into the faint light of the cathedral, its face twisted into a ghastly grin, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth unlike anything the vampires had ever seen. "They were never meant to be here," Marcus whispered, horrified. This wasn't part of the plan. Lyra's bravado faltered for the first time. What did you do, Marcus? What did you unleash? But before he could answer, the creatures charged, their speed blinding, their shrieks filling the air. The vampires and the Inquisition alike were unprepared for the onslaught that followed. Blood, both human and vampire, was spilled in a violent clash. But the new threat was different. They didn't just feed on blood, they fed on fear, on despair, on something much darker. As chaos erupted, Marcus and Lyra found themselves standing back to back, fighting off both the Inquisition and these new horrors, their temporary alliance forged by desperation. But even as they fought, a disturbing realization began to sink in. Something had gone horribly wrong, and neither of them had control anymore. Whatever had been awakened in Ashburn City was far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated, and it was only the beginning. In the midst of the carnage, Marcus caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure watching from a distant rooftop, its eyes glowing a faint red. It wasn't one of the creatures, nor was it human. It was something older, something far more dangerous, and it was waiting. The battle raged on, but the vampires knew one thing: they were no longer the hunters. Now, they were prey. The battlefield was drenched in blood, both human and vampire. The once majestic cathedral now stood in ruins, the ancient walls marred by gunfire, sword slashes, and deep gouges left by the claws of the strange creatures. Marcus and Lyra, panting from exertion, watched as the remaining forces of the Crimson Fangs and the Duskburn Syndicate retreated into the shadows. The Inquisition's numbers had been decimated, but they were regrouping, pulling back to the edges of the cathedral, their weapons aimed warily at the dark creatures still lurking in the distance. The strange creatures hadn't retreated or advanced. They merely stood there, as if waiting for some unseen command. Their distorted forms flickered in the moonlight, a reminder that they were beyond the comprehension of even the vampires. Marcus, his clothes torn and covered in blood, wiped the back of his hand across his mouth. "This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, staring at the shadowy figures. "I don't know what these things are, but they aren't from our world." Lyra, usually poised and confident, now looked shaken. Her eyes darted from Marcus to the creatures, her mind racing for an explanation. "We need to find out what these things are before they tear the city apart," she said. "But that one," she pointed to the shadowy figure on the rooftop. "I felt its presence before. It was watching us." Marcus nodded, his brow furrowed. "It's not just them, Lyra. Something far older is at play. Something neither of us were prepared for." Suddenly, a cold wind swept through the cathedral, carrying with it whispers, voices speaking in a language neither Marcus nor Lyra recognized. The shadowy figure on the rooftop shifted slightly, stepping forward into the light. Its appearance was startling, cloaked in a tattered robe of black, its face obscured beneath a deep hood, save for its glowing red eyes that pierced through the darkness. "Who are you?" Marcus demanded, stepping forward with a mixture of anger and caution. "What have you brought upon this city?" The figure didn't speak at first. Instead, it tilted its head slightly as if studying Marcus and Lyra. Then, in a voice that sounded as though it came from the depths of the earth, it answered, "I am but a messenger." Lyra narrowed her eyes. "A messenger for what?" The figure seemed to smile beneath its hood, though its features remained hidden. "For the awakening," it whispered. "The time of reckoning is upon you, vampires of Ashburn. Your kind has ruled these streets for far too long, but now the balance must be restored." "What are you talking about?" Lyra snapped, frustration rising. "Who sent you?" The figure's glowing eyes shifted to Lyra, and for a moment, she felt as though it were staring into her soul. "There are forces older than you, older than your precious bloodlines, older than the Inquisition itself. Forces that you have unknowingly disturbed." Marcus took a step forward, his fists clenched. "What forces?" The figure raised a hand, gesturing toward the creatures that still lingered at the edges of the cathedral. "They are the first to awaken," it said. "They are the servants of the Old Ones, beings of shadow and despair, bound to this city long before your kind ever walked the earth. And now, they are coming back." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean, coming back?" The figure's voice grew softer, more ominous. "Long ago, before humans, before vampires, before even the Inquisition, There were others who ruled this world. They were cast into the void, imprisoned in realms beyond your understanding. But their prison has weakened, and your endless war has given them the opportunity they needed. Marcus's mind raced. Could it be true? Were they truly facing something beyond their understanding? Something more ancient and terrifying than anything they had ever encountered? What do they want? Marcus asked, his voice a mixture of fear and anger. The figure turned its gaze toward the darkened sky, where storm clouds began to gather, blocking out the stars. They want their world back, it replied, and they will reclaim it starting with Ashburn City. Lyra cursed under her breath. This isn't happening. It can't be. But it was happening. The wind howled louder, and a strange, almost metallic sound echoed through the air, as if the very fabric of reality was tearing apart. The creatures lurking at the edges of the cathedral began to move again, but this time with purpose toward the city itself. The Inquisition, watching from a distance, seemed equally stunned and confused. Their leader, a grizzled veteran named Father Gabriel, called out to Marcus and Lyra. "We need to stop this," he shouted. "Whatever you've done, it's unleashed hell on Earth." Marcus exchanged a glance with Lyra. For a moment, the two of them shared an unspoken understanding. They had been enemies for centuries, their gangs locked in a bitter struggle for control of the city. But this was beyond them. It was beyond vampires, beyond the Inquisition. Something far worse had awakened, and unless they stopped it, Ashburn and perhaps the world would fall. "We'll have to work together," Marcus said grimly. Lyra hesitated, but she knew he was right. "Agreed," she replied. "For now." But even as they forged this uneasy alliance, the figure on the rooftop began to fade into the shadows once more. Before it disappeared completely, it left them with one final, chilling message. You cannot stop what is coming. The old ones have been patient for millennia, and their return is inevitable. This city will be the first to fall, and soon, all of humanity will follow. And with that, the figure was gone, leaving Marcus, Lyra, and the Inquisition to face the horrors that were now descending upon Ashburn. As the creatures spread out into the city, chaos erupted. Buildings shook, lights flickered, and the air itself seemed to grow heavy with an unnatural energy. Whatever these creatures were, they weren't bound by the rules of this world, and somewhere, deep beneath the city, something even darker stirred a presence older than time, waiting for the moment to rise. The alliance between Marcus, Lyra, and the Inquisition was fragile at best, but with Ashburn City falling into chaos, they had no other choice. The old ones, long-forgotten beings of darkness, were slowly spreading their influence, corrupting the very heart of the city. The creatures that accompanied them twisted, nightmarish things of shadow and despair were beginning to claim the streets. And soon, even the most oblivious humans couldn't deny that something was terribly wrong. Father Gabriel led the group toward the heart of the city, where they believed the source of the disturbance lay. Beneath the cathedral, they had discovered a network of ancient tunnels that ran deep underground tunnels that had long been abandoned and forgotten. According to old maps found in the Inquisition's archives, these tunnels led to an ancient burial site, one that predated the city itself. The deeper they went, the colder it became. The walls seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and strange whispers echoed through the air, as if the very stones were alive. Lyra glanced over at Marcus, her eyes betraying her unease. "You think this is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded grimly. "This is where the old ones were imprisoned. If we can find a way to seal them back inside, we might be able to stop this." But even as he spoke, a deep rumble reverberated through the ground, and the air grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. The group slowed their pace, their flashlights flickering as if struggling to stay lit. The oppressive darkness seemed to grow stronger the further they ventured, as though it were swallowing the light itself. Finally, they reached the burial site. It was a vast underground chamber, the ceiling so high it disappeared into darkness. In the center of the chamber stood a massive stone door, covered in strange symbols and carvings that none of them could decipher. It hummed with a low, ominous vibration, like a heartbeat, and beyond it, they could sense something stirring. "This is it," Father Gabriel said, his voice tense. This is where they're trying to break through. Lyra took a step forward, examining the door. We need to find a way to seal it shut permanently. But before anyone could act, the stone door began to crack. Thin lines of light seeped through the fissures, pulsating with an otherworldly energy. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Marcus stepped back, his eyes wide with horror. We're too late. With a deafening roar, the door shattered, sending chunks of stone flying in all directions. From the darkness beyond, a wave of freezing air blasted through the chamber, knocking everyone to the ground. The light that had seeped through the cracks was now gone, replaced by an impenetrable blackness of void that seemed to consume everything in its path. Then, from the depths of the darkness, they emerged, the Old Ones. Their forms were indistinct, shifting like shadows within shadows, but their presence was undeniable. Their very essence radiated pure malevolence, a hatred for all things living. Eyes glowing with a sickly green light opened within the darkness, fixing on Marcus, Lyra, Father Gabriel, and the remaining few who had survived the descent into the tunnels. The creatures spoke not in words, but in thoughts overwhelming, maddening thoughts that clawed at their minds. Visions of death, of endless suffering, of worlds consumed by darkness flooded their senses, driving some to the brink of insanity. The Old Ones fed on fear, and here, in the heart of the city, they had found an endless feast. We have to run, Lyra screamed, her voice shaking. We can't fight this. But there was nowhere to run. The Old Ones moved with impossible speed, their dark forms sweeping through the chamber, enveloping everything in their path. One by one, Marcus's lieutenants were taken, their screams cut short as they were pulled into the black void. Father Gabriel raised his cross, trying to summon the power of his faith to drive them back, but it was futile. The Old Ones were not demons, they were older, more primal, untouched by the rules of heaven or hell. They brushed aside his defenses like they were nothing, and in an instant, he was gone, consumed by the void. Marcus and Lyra, the last one standing, backed away toward the tunnel entrance, but it was too late. The Old Ones had surrounded them, their forms shifting and twisting in the darkness, growing closer with each passing moment. This wasn't supposed to happen, Marcus muttered, his voice hollow. We were never supposed to release them. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, though she would never have admitted it. This city, it's doomed. As the Old Ones descended upon them, Marcus and Lyra felt a crushing weight pressed down on them, a weight that wasn't physical but mental, as though their very souls were being squeezed, drained of all hope. Their vision blurred, their thoughts fragmented, and the last thing they saw before the darkness consumed them completely was the city above, the city they had once ruled, now overtaken by an unimaginable horror. Ashburn City fell into silence that night. The Old Ones spread through the streets, their dark influence infecting every corner of the once vibrant metropolis. The humans who remained in the city felt it in their bones, a creeping dread, a shadow on their hearts that they could not explain. And one by one, they began to vanish. No one would ever know what truly happened beneath the cathedral that night, but the stories began to spread. Whispers of dark figures in the alleys, of shadows that moved on their own, of people disappearing without a trace. The city was dying, and no one could stop it. And somewhere, deep beneath the earth, the Old Ones stirred, their prison shattered, their hunger endless. They had returned. Asterisk, asterisk, the end. Asterisk, asterisk.